Kimberly Ross had a devout religious upbringing.
She was a good girl, just always singing and, in church.
And her husband, Bill, was just as good-natured.
Kimberly and Bill were people who would take in others who needed help.
People like Ashley Cook and Justin Young.
She was calling Kim mom and calling my brother dad.
Bill took him into his home. He took him on as another child.
One night, Kimberly and Bill's welcoming refuge turned into a crime scene.
They shot my husband.
They shot your husband. Who has shot your husband?
I don't know who they were.
The two intruders just opened the door to the bedroom and began shooting.
Was it a home invasion?
I know a lot of people was alarmed by that and scared by that.
Was it vengeance?
Kim really made him believe that she was being hurt and that he had to save her.
Or had the good girl gone bad?
Kimberly Ross was a pathological liar.
Shelbyville, Tennessee, February 14th, 2007. It was a little after 2 a.m. in this quiet country town an hour south of Nashville.
Shelbyville is small. It's a rural southern town. Everybody kind of knows everybody, and everybody knows kind of everybody's business.
And everybody in Shelbyville was about to be shot.
It's County 911. Where's the emergency?
She was hysterical. The 911 operator had extreme difficulty understanding her.
The caller was 37-year-old Kimberly Ross.
Ma'am, you need to calm down so I can understand you.
But when she finally managed to make herself understood, it instantly became clear why Kimberly was so hysterical.
They shot my husband.
They what?
Shot my husband.
Who has shot your husband?
I don't know who they were.
Did they come in your house and do this?
Yes, sir.
She's been a victim of a home invasion, and her husband's been shot and is clinging to life.
Is your husband breathing?
You can tell that Mr. Ross is still alive because she's actually yelling at him to lay still, to be still.
Honey, lay down. Lay down. Lay down. Please. Quit moving. Lay down.
But his condition was dire.
A lot of blood. Oh my God, a lot of blood.
Deputies from the Bedford County Sheriff's Office rushed to the scene.
So I was pretty close by, about 2:15 when the call came out.
And when they arrived, they found 19-year-old Justin Young lying near the front door, his hands and feet bound with baling twine.
He was living with the Rosses. He was friends with them through Kimberly's son.
He was yelling for help.
Kimberly was further inside the house, her hands and feet bound with an electrical cord.
She was tied around her hands with her hands in front, and the same cable ran down to her feet, and it was wrapped around her feet.
She had managed to get to a cell phone, to make the call.
And Kimberly's husband, 40-year-old Bill Ross, was in the bedroom.
Despite the horrific nature of his wound, he was still alive.
He was breathing, and I could hear him making noise.
With Bill clinging to life, the EMTs loaded him into the back of the ambulance, while sheriff's deputies started going over the crime scene, looking for anything that might help identify the two home invaders.
We were looking for any evidence, a weapon that may have been used, a firearm, anything that would connect the dots that way.
But for the moment, all they knew was that they had a very unusual crime on their hands.
We had a victim with multiple gunshot wounds. We had two subjects that lived there that were tied up.
And the investigation would soon focus on what was happening inside the home of Bill and Kimberly Ross.
It's a situation where you want to know what's the rest of the story.
Born in 1969, Kimberly Ballman grew up in a small Indiana town, raised by a family of devout Pentecostal Christians.
Kim was a little church girl, long skirts, long dark hair, just always singing and, in church. She was a good girl.
But when Kim was a teenager, the family moved to Oklahoma. And soon after, the good girl rebelled against her religious upbringing.
Stories from the family is she was sleeping around. She got kicked out because she got knocked up.
Only 19, Kimberly married before giving birth to a son in 1989. but the marriage didn't last.
She had one child. He was somewhere around the age of 2.
Barely in her 20s and desperate to support her child, Kimberly found work as an exotic dancer, which was how she first met William Galloway, although at first he didn't realize she was a stripper.
Me and some buddies, we were just kind of watching the girls and talking and drinking. This girl was sitting at the bar in a nice, expensive evening dress. We didn't know who she was. I said, hey, let's put some money up and see if we can get her to get on stage, take that dress off. Well, I guess the trick was on us because she acted like she'd never done this before, but thought the money was nice, so she got up there and she actually stripped for us. And I didn't find out later that she actually worked there.
Discovering that he'd been played didn't do anything to deter William, though.
And I asked her out, and we started dating, and then she got pregnant. So I asked her to marry me.
Kimberly said yes, but their happiness would be put to the test by complications shortly after the birth of their daughter, Billy.
I had a seizure when I was like a week old. I was in the hospital.
Something attacked her brainstem. On one side of her tongue, she don't have control of the muscles. We had to take her to all kinds of hospitals and doctors.
And when it was clear that their daughter would survive, the relieved parents got married. And 2 years later, the couple also had a son, Kimberly's third child.
We did pretty good. We lived out on some acreage and did stuff together. I would say for the first 5 or 6 years, we were really happy.
But things changed after Kimberly convinced William to give her the money to buy a friend's bar.
We grew apart after she bought the bar. I was just losing money hand over fist in it.
The business eventually failed, and soon after, Kimberly's husband filed for divorce, kicking off a bitter custody dispute over their 2 children.
My divorce got so ugly that I hired a lawyer, but the judge awarded her custody.
And things were still being finalized in 2004 when Kimberly's uncle died, and the 35-year-old went home to Indiana with her children for his funeral.
Me and my brothers and my mom drove up there. And then I remember after the funeral, we went to eat with someone. And it was Bill.
38-year-old Bill Ross, who'd known Kimberly since they were kids. 3 years older than Kimberly, when Bill was 15, his mother died, and the teenager moved in with Kimberly's uncle, Andy.
He was a good person. He pretty much shaped Bill, I think.
Bill wasn't all that close to Kimberly, though, since she moved to Oklahoma soon after. And her uncle's funeral was the first time she'd seen Bill in years.
We went to eat with Bill, and they were talking like they'd been friends.
She was happy to see Bill.
Bill was pretty happy to see her, too.
They were both all over each other at the bar after her uncle's funeral.
They apparently made a deeper connection, because after the funeral, when Bill went back to Tennessee, where he'd been living for nearly 10 years, Kimberly soon followed.
She moved to Tennessee like within days.
And within months, once Kimberly's divorce was final, she and Bill were married.
It's like, this is it, I really like her. I think we're gonna do this.
After the wedding, Bill and Kimberly settled into a house he bought on the outskirts of Shelbyville, not far from the car dealership where he worked.
He was the top salesman, I want to say, for 3 consecutive years.
He was the breadwinner. Kimberly didn't earn an income.
But she wasn't a stay-at-home mom either. After Kim and her ex-husband agreed to a custody arrangement to avoid uprooting the kids, Kimberly's 2 youngest children stayed behind in Oklahoma with their father. And while her oldest son, who was almost 16, did come to Tennessee with his mother, he soon moved out on his own.
He was not living in the home at the time, but he was a frequent visitor on weekends, things like that.
However, Kimberly and Bill weren't exactly empty nesters. By 2007, they'd taken in a friend of her son's, 19-year-old Justin Young.
Justin had a difficult time dealing with the divorce between his parents and had a difficult time dealing with his stepdad.
And Bill, perhaps remembering the kindness Kimberly's uncle had shown him, was more than willing to let Justin stay with them.
Bill took him into his home. He took him on as another child.
So did Kimberly.
Kim doted on Justin like that was her son.
Before long, Justin acted like one, too.
Justin called Kim Mom.
And that suited Kimberly just fine, since having Justin around the house also filled the void left when her youngest children opted to stay in Oklahoma.
She had this need to be some kind of a mother figure.
She had a need to be accepted by someone. She needed something to call family.
Justin wasn't the only member of her surrogate family either. There was also 23-year-old Ashley Cook.
She was somewhat of a transient. She lived several different places, was not working.
She'd also been arrested a few times for possession of marijuana.
She had misdemeanor stuff that, you don't want to see on a young person's record, but you're not really shocked when you do.
Nevertheless, when a friend introduced Kimberly and Bill to Ashley, the older couple decided to help out the troubled young woman.
Kimberly was paying her bills and giving her money to keep her up.
My brother helped pay for a place for her to live.
And while Ashley didn't live with Kimberly and Bill, it was evident that she considered them family.
She was calling Kim Mom and calling my brother Dad.
But on Valentine's Day 2007, after a brutal attack that left her husband fighting for his life, the authorities would be asking, did Kimberly's need to take care of others lead to a tragic betrayal? Coming up, the investigators questioned Justin and Kimberly about the home invasion.
Justin reported that he woke up to discover a black male holding a gun to his head.
But will the evidence say otherwise?
There were minute details that didn't match up.
At a little after 2 o'clock on the morning of Valentine's Day 2007, the Bedford County, Tennessee 911 Center received a frantic call from 37-year-old Kimberly Ross.
She's been a victim of a home invasion, and her husband's been shot and is clinging to life.
Is your husband breathing?
A lot of blood. Oh my God, a lot of blood. A lot of blood.
Within minutes, deputies arrived at the Ross home just outside Shelbyville, Tennessee.
When you enter the house, it's weapons drawn. I mean, we were told on dispatch that the two assailants had left the scene, so obviously we have to clear the residence.
Inside the house, the deputies found Kimberly and 19-year-old Justin Young, who lived with the Rosses. Both had been tied up.
Justin was tied with string like you might bale hay with.
Kimberly had been tied with some type of a cord, electrical cord.
It was loose enough for her to get a cell phone and make a phone call to 911.
Kimberly's husband, 40-year-old Bill Ross, was in the bedroom with a gunshot wound to the head.
It appeared there was gray material oozing from the wound, which would obviously be brain matter.
So without a minute to lose, the EMTs loaded Bill onto a stretcher and into the back of the ambulance.
You're changing the scene and possibly destroying evidence, but that's just something that has to be done. I mean, the human life is way more important than the investigation.
And a life flight helicopter from Nashville was already en route, even as the EMTs rushed Bill to the local hospital.
They have a helipad there, so they would go to the helipad and then meet the helicopter there.
But by the time Bill reached the helipad, it was too late.
He passed away in the back of the ambulance.
Bill Ross was dead, and in an instant, the focus shifted from saving his life to solving his murder.
I had deputies take the scene off because the crime actually was committed in the house. I mean, there's evidence possibly outside the house, and also to keep people away from the scene as well.
And while the crime scene tape went up outside the house, Kimberly and Justin were inside, giving sheriff's deputies a detailed account of the attack.
The assailants were described as two unknown black males who had apparently crawled in through a window.
The window was in Justin's room.
Justin reported that he was asleep in bed. He woke up to discover a black male holding a gun to his head and another one tying him up.
He said that one of the males came to his room that was armed, held him at gunpoint and told him that if he would be still, be quiet, that he would be okay. He would not be harmed.
Meanwhile, according to Kimberly, she had been in the living room watching television.
The first moment she's aware there's a problem is when Justin Young is being escorted down the hallway with the two intruders armed with guns. They tie her up and basically shove her to the floor.
Kimberly said that based on what she'd overheard, the two men were looking for someone.
She stated that she had heard the name. They were looking for William and Jimmy.
She didn't know who William and Jimmy were, except her husband's name is Bill. She said that she had no idea why they were there, who they were, what they were upset about.
And she had no explanation for what the two men did next.
They then inexplicably just opened the door to the bedroom where Mr. Ross was asleep and began shooting.
Kimberly said that the killers had fled after the shooting.
We did not know what their mode of transportation was, whether it was on foot, whether they had left in a vehicle or what.
But that all changed once the investigators escorted Kimberly out of the house to take her down to the station for a formal statement.
Once I got her outside the house, she immediately started screaming, "My car, my car." They took my car.
Was it the break that could lead investigators to the killers?
They get a description of the car, got on the radio, boloed that to other officers to be on the lookout for that vehicle.
And that wasn't the only clue the investigators had to work with either. Outside the house, they found something that seemed to confirm Justin's story about the intruders coming in the window.
They noticed here's a stepladder outside Justin Young's window.
And processing the bedroom, crime scene technicians made an important discovery about the murder weapon.
There were a couple of shell casings on the floor at the foot of the bed. They were .380 casings.
But elsewhere in the house, they made another puzzling discovery.
There's a gun cabinet in the living room with a door open, and they discovered there was a box of .380 ammunition in there, but they did not see a .380 caliber weapon. Is it a coincidence that Mr. Ross was shot with a .380 pistol?
After all, according to what Justin told the investigators, the killers didn't need to shoot Bill with his own gun.
The facts that they were told was that both assailants were already armed when Justin Young was awakened.
If Justin was right, why would the killers take one of Bill's guns?
We had no idea what we were looking at. Was this a drug deal gone bad? Was this an old vendetta over something else? We had no clue.
What they did know was that something wasn't adding up. So investigators turned to their two witnesses. It was 6 o'clock that morning before the investigators were finally able to sit down with Kimberly and Justin to take their formal statements.
They were transported to the hospital, checked out, and then brought to the sheriff's department.
And ushered into separate interrogation rooms. They each gave essentially the same account of the shooting that they'd given at the scene.
Kimberly and Justin repeated the story of this home invasion.
However, the investigators soon noticed something about their individual stories.
They told basically the same story, substance, but there were minute details that didn't match up.
They had some discrepancies in the description of the perpetrators, what they were wearing, some of the sequence of events.
Of course, a certain amount of discrepancy was expected.
You get that when you have people that have been subjected to a traumatic event.
Especially someone like Kimberly, who just lost her husband.
She seemed a little shaken by it all. You know, there was a little bit of like a bewilderment type look.
Justin, on the other hand, didn't look bewildered.
He just seemed like a very nervous young man.
So, already suspicious of his claim that both intruders had been armed when they came in his window, one of the investigators brought Justin back into the interrogation room for a second interview.
We went in and told Justin Young, that essentially that he just didn't believe him, that, there were a lot of inconsistencies between what he and Kimberly were saying. There were a lot of inconsistencies between what he was saying and the physical evidence.
He got caught in a web of his own words.
And once tangled in it, he tried to talk his way out.
At that point, Justin did change his story.
In fact, Justin didn't just change his story. He started naming names, including a name the investigators had yet to hear.
Justin broke and said that Ashley's the one that done the shooting. She's the one that killed him.
Coming up, The investigators bring Ashley in for questioning.
It was not a plausible story. It didn't add up.
And that leads to a shocking accusation.
Kimberly led Ashley to believe that Bill had been abusing Kimberly.
On Valentine's Day 2007, Kimberly Ross's husband of 2 years, Bill Ross, had been shot to death in his home outside Shelbyville, Tennessee.
Kimberly said that 2 black males had entered the home, shot her husband, and tied her and Justin up and left.
And at first, 19-year-old Justin Young, who lived with the Rosses, had told a somewhat similar story.
A lot of their facts were similar, but they had some details that were different.
Suspicious, the investigators had brought Justin in for a second round of questioning, and the result was a breakthrough.
He figured he's telling a lie, it's not going to hold up any further, and so he needs to start telling the truth. So Justin's next version was that this home invasion by 2 unknown assailants was bogus.
Instead, Justin said that it was Ashley Cook who'd killed Bill.
That's the first time we had heard the name Ashley.
Ashley's name may have been new to the homicide investigators, but she was no stranger to the victim. Another troubled young person like Justin, Ashley didn't live with Kimberly and Bill, but she did depend on their generosity.
The Rosses provided financial support.
Including the trailer outside Shelbyville where Ashley lived.
They paid the rent, they paid the utilities, things like that.
So why would she kill the golden goose? It was simple, according to Justin.
Bill Ross was going to cut it all off.
Justin said that Bill's decision must have made Ashley furious because she was the one who'd actually crawled in his window early that morning.
Ashley came over, came through the window, came down the hall, grabbed the gun out of the cabinet, chambered around, and then shot Mr. Ross.
According to Justin, Ashley's the one that came up with the story about the gentleman breaking in, and she tied him up and told him, "This is the story you tell."
But if that were true, why would Justin and Kimberly actually tell that story once the sheriff's deputies arrived? Hoping for an answer, the investigators brought Kimberly back in for another round of questioning.
Kimberly says that she lied in the first statement because she was afraid of Ashley.
And like Justin, Kimberly said Ashley had murdered Bill because he decided to stop supporting her financially.
I do recall Kimberly saying Ashley got mad at Bill, and that was her reasoning for shooting him.
However, while Kimberly and Justin's new stories essentially matched, the investigators didn't necessarily believe them.
Why wouldn't you have told that in the first place? To say that you're afraid, well, now you've got a bunch of police officers, you're going to be safe from that point. Why aren't you pointing law enforcement in the direction of the person who did it?
It was not a plausible story. It didn't add up.
And yet, at just after 7:30 that morning, while the investigators were finishing up with Kimberly and Justin, patrol officers made a discovery that appeared to confirm at least some of their story: Kimberly's stolen car.
It was abandoned in a church parking lot, about a half a mile or so from Ashley's house.
Had Kimberly and Justin actually been telling the truth?
The vehicle was basically clean. There was no weapons. There was nothing that was tied back to the crime scene.
However, even without the murder weapon, finding the car so close to Ashley's trailer was enough to send the deputies looking for her.
They got her and brought her to the sheriff's department.
And without telling her right away that Justin and Kimberly had accused her of murder, they asked Ashley what she knew about Kimberly's car.
At which time she basically started telling a story that Kimberly had given her the car and told her to take it.
And Bill's murder. According to Ashley, she'd had nothing to do with it.
She was told at that point, look, Justin and Kimberly have ratted you out. They have pointed the finger at you and said that you alone did this.
The news appeared to take Ashley by surprise.
She became quite emotional. She felt like she had been sold out by Justin and Kimberly.
And in her anger about the betrayal, Ashley ended up making a damning admission.
She's now saying that this was a conspiracy involving myself, Justin Young, Kimberly Ross.
Although according to Ashley, Kimberly was the mastermind.
Ashley said Kimberly had put her up to this, to do this.
She was given $30 and was told she could keep the car for murdering Bill Ross.
Ashley claimed that the money and the car weren't the main reasons she'd done it, though.
Kimberly led Ashley to believe that Bill had been abusing Kimberly.
Kimberly said she couldn't get a divorce because she would be left with nothing. And so the plan was hatched that she would come over and commit the murder.
However, according to Ashley, that wasn't the entire plan.
They had conspired to basically blame a couple of young black men as the perpetrators.
Not just in a generic sense either. Ashley said they'd planned to set up two men she knew.
They'd hung out together, done drugs before, things like that.
And on the night of February 13th, Ashley had invited the two men to come to her trailer.
They drove over, was hanging out with her. She said, I've got to go take care of something. Y'all just hang out. I'll be back shortly.
Ashley told the investigators that she'd taken a cab to the convenience store not far from Kimberly's house.
So then she walked to the Ross house. She told how there was a stepladder outside. She climbed up the stepladder. That was left in place through the window. Justin had previously loaded the gun, chambered around, and wiped it down so there would be no fingerprints on it.
He loaded the gun because she didn't know how to use it. She had never fired a weapon, or I doubt maybe that she had even held a weapon prior to that night.
Then she claims she just opened the door without even looking, sticks her arm in the doorway, and fires 3 or 4 shots.
And after shooting Bill, according to Ashley, she'd tied up Kimberly and Justin, but not too tight.
Kimberly was left in a situation to where she could make a phone call, a 911 call.
Although by then, Ashley was supposed to have carried out the rest of their plan.
It was her intention to give the vehicle with the gun in it to the 2 black males that she left at her house.
They'd be driving through town about the time there was, they'd be on the lookout, and they would get picked up, questioned, find a murder weapon, dead man's car, and deflect any further investigation on their end.
At least that was what was supposed to happen. But according to Ashley, when she got back to the trailer, the plan to frame 2 innocent men for murder had quickly gone awry.
When she returned, they were gone. She didn't know what to do. She left the car at the church. She walked back to the house.
But according to Ashley, before ditching the car, she had decided to hang on to the gun.
She had told them that it was under the mattress.
And the .380 caliber pistol was still there when the investigators searched her trailer a few hours later.
It all come apart so fast that by the time we got to her, she hadn't had time, really, to get rid of the weapon.
The gun was enough hard evidence to place Ashley under arrest for murder.
It matched the shell casings found at the scene.
But it didn't prove her account that Kimberly and Justin had been involved.
The determination was made to go back and talk to each one of them again.
And since Justin had been the first one to break last time around, the investigators started with him.
He would be the most likely to cooperate and tell the truth. And sure enough, Justin does. He agrees that this is a conspiracy.
And according to Justin, he'd gotten involved in the murder plot for pretty much the same reason as Ashley.
She told Justin that my brother was abusing her.
Kim really made him believe that she was being hurt and that he had to save her.
Although according to Justin, when Kimberly brought up killing Bill, he'd tried to talk her out of it, at least initially.
He had urged Kimberly to get a divorce. She responded that she would be left with nothing if she went through a divorce.
But if Bill died, there would be much more.
She said that there was $1 million life insurance policy.
He was promised that she would move to Oklahoma and he would move with her and they would live on a ranch.
When the investigators brought Kimberly back in for another round of questions and confronted her with what they'd learned from Justin and Ashley, she didn't deny it.
She was pretty open about being involved in a conspiracy to have Bill murdered.
And she fully backed up everything that Justin and Ashley said about Bill's alleged abuse.
Kimberly stated that he had raped her the morning of the murder.
And it was hardly the first time, according to Kimberly.
Her statement begins with literally, Bill Ross is a horrible individual who has raped me, he has beat me, he has bruised me, he has burned me.
Which in Kimberly's mind meant that Bill had gotten what he deserved.
She's admitting that she was involved in a plan to murder her husband, claiming, I'm justified in what I did.
But would a jury see it that way? At the end of her third round of questioning, the investigators placed Kimberly under arrest for murder.
She was charged with a conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and first-degree murder.
And so were Justin and Ashley.
It clearly involved these three people.
But was there another person involved in the story? Another name that the investigators hadn't heard yet. Coming up, Bill's sister makes an unexpected discovery.
I called the number, and he said, who the hell is this?
But will it reveal a new motive?
They had been engaged to be married for approximately 5 years.
By the afternoon of February 16, 2007, it had been less than 48 hours since Kimberly Ross's husband, Bill, had been murdered in their home outside Shelbyville, Tennessee.
The story was given that it was a home invasion. These two fellas came in, shot Bill, and escaped.
But within hours, Bedford County Sheriff's investigators had arrested 37-year-old Kimberly, 19-year-old Justin Young, and 23-year-old Ashley Cook for Bill's murder.
This is definitely not a home invasion. It was reported that way to start with, and I know a lot of people was alarmed by that and scared by that, and justifiably, but that's not the case.
Kimberly was the main actor in this. It was Kimberly Ross that put them on a path to murdering Bill Ross.
Who pulled the trigger?
Ashley.
The other woman?
Yes, I was trying to. They saw him abusing me, and they couldn't take it no more.
According to what Justin had told the investigators, Bill's alleged abuse and his $1 million insurance policy had motivated the murder. But after doing a little digging, the investigators had their doubts.
Mr. Ross had a life insurance policy of $25,000.
And they suspected Kimberly's claims of abuse were also a lie.
And doing the background with co-workers, family, associates, I couldn't find anybody that had anything bad to say about Bill Ross.
Not one single person ever reported that he had a temper or that he was an angry person or that anything like that.
But if Bill wasn't abusive and there was no $1 million payoff, what motivated the crime? The first clue would come that afternoon, but it wouldn't be the investigators who found it. By 2 days after the murder, on the 16th, the investigators had finished gathering evidence at Bill and Kimberly's house.
After they released the crime scene, Bill's family were allowed in there to collect his things.
And while Bill's sister Tammy was packing his personal effects, she heard a cell phone.
I looked around and it kept going off, and we found it underneath some clothes on a dresser top.
It wasn't Bill's phone, though.
I already had his phone that he had laid on the bedside table, and I knew it wasn't it.
She had found Kimberly Ross' cell phone.
And since the sound that led her to it indicated an incoming text, Tammy looked at the log and discovered a series of recent messages.
They were saying, "Sweetheart, where are you? You know, I'm waiting at the airport." I called the number and I said, "Who is this?" And he said, "Who the hell is this?"
And when Tammy explained that Kimberly was in jail, under arrest for murdering her husband, the man on the phone became even more confused.
He said, "Her husband." I said, "The murder of her husband." And he said, "Wait a minute, she's my fiance." He was calling from Oklahoma, and he said that they were engaged to be married and that he was supposed to pick her up at the airport that morning, and she was moving there.
Law enforcement talked to him, and we got a really complete picture of the kind of person we're dealing with Kimberly Ross.
The man told the investigators that he'd known Kimberly for years, back when she'd lived in Oklahoma, and that they'd gotten engaged before she moved to Tennessee.
They had been engaged to be married for approximately 5 years.
Kimberly's fiance said he'd been expecting Kimberly to move back to Oklahoma to join him, but that she'd kept putting things off because of her oldest son.
Kim had told him she was trying to get custody back of him, and so she was traveling from Tennessee to Oklahoma all the time.
And what about Bill Ross? Kimberly's fiance told the investigators that he knew the name. He even knew that Kimberly had been living with him, but he'd never heard anything about them being married.
He had no clue. He thought that Bill Ross was Kimberly's cousin.
However, according to the fiance, their long-awaited wedding was finally supposed to be happening, which explained all the frantic texts about waiting at the airport.
On the 14th, she was planning on flying out of Nashville back to Oklahoma, and they were going to be married and live happily ever after.
Was the future husband waiting in the wings Kimberly's true motive for murdering Bill?
I believe Kimberly's motive was simply she wanted out of the marriage.
And while there was no $1 million insurance policy, there was money at stake. Cash Kimberly was getting from her Oklahoma fiance.
I found all kinds of Western Union receipts from the fiance from Oklahoma.
He was paying Kimberly's bills. He was sending her quite a bit of money, anywhere from $400 to $600 a week for her upkeep.
Small sums that eventually added up to some serious cash.
He had apparently sent her more than $100,000 over the years.
But was he also involved in Bill's murder? After interviewing the fiance, the investigators concluded that the answer was no.
There's no doubt in my mind that he would have been the next victim, eventually.
Nor would he be the first person Kimberly had tricked out of money. Digging into her background, the investigators uncovered a laundry list of various frauds and schemes that she'd perpetrated back in Oklahoma.
She claimed that she was a pastor of a church. She claimed a lot of things that just weren't true.
And she had even been arrested for once impersonating a police officer.
She had a uniform. She had an ID that showed she was a police officer.
Kimberly Ross was a pathological liar.
And she'd had no trouble convincing Ashley and Justin to go along with her plot to kill Bill.
Justin believed that Kim was being abused. Kim kept feeding him that line.
But was that Justin's only motive?
The way she doted on him, it wasn't a natural relationship that you would have with your best friend's mother.
There was a suggestion, that she and Justin engaged in sexual activity.
It wasn't true, according to Kimberly.
She vehemently denied any of that.
And as she and her attorney prepared for trial, Kimberly confidently stood by her claims of abuse.
She had a sense that it was a winnable case, that she wouldn't be convicted of first-degree murder.
But was she right? Could she pull off an acquittal? After all, she'd already been able to convince people that she was a pastor and even a cop.
She could manipulate people easy.
So was it unreasonable to think that she could convince a jury that she'd been abused?
If so, then maybe she did decide to kill her husband, out of some need to get away from that.
Or would it turn out that Kimberly had one more surprise in store for everyone? Coming up, can the prosecution convince Justin to take the stand?
We made no promises to him whatsoever.
Or will Kimberly's power of manipulation prove decisive?
They played right into her hand.
On Wednesday, November 7th, 2007, Kimberly Ross walked into the Marshall County Courthouse in Lewisburg, Tennessee. It had been almost 9 months since the 38-year-old had been arrested for masterminding the murder of her husband, Bill.
She was laying the foundation to this story that my brother abused her, trying to get people to believe it, months before she killed him.
And according to the prosecution, she'd recruited 19-year-old Justin Young and 24-year-old Ashley Cook to help her carry out her deadly plan.
She was very manipulative. They were young, impressionable, and they played right into her hand.
But since Kimberly was the alleged key to the conspiracy, the prosecutors had decided to put her on trial first.
They had a very good case, but not an exceptionally strong case.
Kimberly vowed to fight the charges, but as the trial date approached, something happened that made her reconsider.
Justin turned state's evidence.
When we met with Justin, we made no promises to him whatsoever. If you want to cooperate, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. I believe Justin Young was sincerely remorseful that he had decided to become involved in this.
And his testimony could be very damaging to Kimberly's claims of abuse.
He never saw any of that. He lived there. He said he saw no signs of that. He certainly never overheard an angry word between them.
But would he ever take the stand? When Kimberly found out that the prosecution had been talking to Justin, her reaction was immediate.
She just basically threw her hands up and said, well, it's over then. So then I called the DA and we worked out a deal fairly quickly.
And when Kimberly went to court on November 7th, it was to plead guilty to first-degree murder.
The judge accepted her guilty plea and sentenced her to life with possibility of parole. Kimberly has to serve 51 calendar years before she's eligible for parole.
The police and prosecutors were satisfied that justice had been served.
She was a very cold, calculated killer. She was 100% a part of this. She may not have pulled the trigger, but she might as well have.
Bill's sister is satisfied too, but that doesn't make the murder's aftermath any easier.
We're supposed to pray for our enemies. And I can do that with the woman that shot my brother, but I have to this day no sense of forgiveness in my heart for Kim.
And perhaps most telling of all, neither does Kimberly's own daughter.
My mom was evil. She didn't care who she hurt and didn't have no feelings for anyone but herself.
It began with a pair of shoes standing alone on an empty stretch of desert highway. No footprints leading away. No signs of a struggle. Just worn leather boots coated in red Utah dust, positioned so neatly that the first deputy at the scene thought someone had placed them there as a joke. The wind whispered across the sagebrush. Telephone poles hummed. A storm gathered over the mountains, and before sunset, every trace that might have explained those abandoned shoes disappeared beneath blowing sand. That was the first mistake. The second was believing the missing man would come home on his own. October 1982. Cedar Valley, Utah. A quiet farming community where everyone recognized every pickup truck rolling down Main Street, where unlocked doors were a habit instead of a risk, where the loudest evening sound was usually coyotes calling from the hills. Crime belonged somewhere else. Murder belonged somewhere else. Missing people belonged somewhere else. Until 28-year-old Daniel Mercer vanished without warning. Daniel wasn't the kind of man people expected to disappear. He worked hard, paid his bills, never missed Sunday dinner with his parents. Friends described him as dependable to the point of boredom. He had no criminal record, no dangerous debts, no secret double life anyone knew about. On the afternoon he vanished, he left work just after 5. He smiled at coworkers, promised he'd see them Monday. Bought gasoline at a station outside town. Picked up groceries. The cashier remembered him joking about the weather, saying the storm looked worse than the forecast predicted. Then he drove east. He was never seen alive again. His truck wasn't found. His body wasn't found. Only those boots. The sheriff's office treated it as a missing person case. Volunteers searched dry riverbeds. Helicopters swept across canyons. Ranchers rode horseback through miles of open land. Families carried flashlights into abandoned barns. Hunters checked old mine shafts. Nothing. Then came the phone call. A woman living nearly 30 miles away reported hearing a vehicle racing down an isolated dirt road around midnight. She remembered headlights flashing wildly across her bedroom window. Moments later, she heard what sounded like two doors slamming. Voices. One shouting. Another lower, calmer. Then silence. Investigators arrived the next morning. Tire tracks. Scattered beer bottles. A burned campfire. Nothing connecting the scene to Daniel Mercer. Still, the story spread. The town whispered. Someone had seen something. Someone knew more than they admitted. Rumors multiplied faster than evidence. Some believed Daniel had run away. Others insisted he'd uncovered something he shouldn't have. Within weeks, every coffee shop conversation circled back to the same impossible question. How does a man disappear without leaving a single answer? Days turned into months. Months into years. The case file thickened with interviews that led nowhere. Hundreds of names. Hundreds of tips. Nearly all useless. Psychics claimed they knew where Daniel rested. Treasure hunters insisted they had discovered hidden graves. Anonymous callers accused neighbors, strangers, even family members. Detectives chased every lead until each collapsed beneath the weight of speculation. The evidence room remained nearly empty. 2 boots. Receipts. Missing truck. Nothing else. Then another strange detail surfaced. Daniel's wristwatch. His brother insisted Daniel never removed it. The stainless steel watch had been a birthday gift from their father years earlier. Yet no watch appeared among the recovered belongings. It was simply gone. The sheriff wondered whether robbery explained the disappearance. But why steal a watch and leave expensive boots? Nothing fit. Every theory created new contradictions. As winter buried the valley beneath snow, hope froze with it. Neighbors stopped organizing searches. Reporters moved on. Television crews packed their cameras. Another cold case had quietly entered history. But history refused to let go. Because someone kept watching. Every anniversary of Daniel's disappearance, flowers appeared beside the lonely highway where the boots had been discovered. No note. No name. Fresh flowers. Every single year. Yellow daisies. Always yellow. No florist remembered selling identical arrangements. No witness ever saw who placed them. Detectives installed hidden cameras. Nothing. One year the flowers appeared between patrol checks only 45 minutes apart. As though whoever visited understood police routines better than the deputies themselves. The mystery deepened. Retired Sheriff Harold Benson admitted years later that those flowers haunted him more than the missing man. The dead don't leave anniversaries, he reportedly said. The living do. Investigators reopened interviews. Daniel's former girlfriend remembered something odd from the week before he vanished. He had become unusually cautious. He looked over his shoulder while driving. He avoided discussing work. Twice he stopped speaking mid-sentence whenever strangers entered restaurants. She assumed stress. Now it sounded different. Fear. What frightened him? No one knew. Co-workers admitted Daniel had argued with an unidentified visitor outside the warehouse where he worked loading construction materials. The man drove a dark sedan. No license plate remembered. No name. One witness described him wearing mirrored sunglasses despite cloudy weather. Another remembered a heavy silver ring. That was all. Years passed. Witnesses died. Memories blurred. Faces faded. Evidence deteriorated inside cardboard boxes. Technology advanced while the Mercer file collected dust. Fingerprint comparisons remained manual. DNA science barely existed. Old detectives retired. Young detectives inherited mysteries they never witnessed. By the early 1990s, Daniel Mercer had become less of a person than a photograph pinned inside an aging cabinet. A smile trapped forever in black and white. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel's mother refused to stop asking questions. Every month, she visited the sheriff's office carrying handwritten notes. Names she'd remembered. Dreams she'd had. Rumors she'd overheard in grocery stores. Most detectives politely thanked her. Few believed the information mattered. Yet she noticed something others ignored. One interview transcript had vanished from the case file. Not misplaced. Missing. Someone had interviewed a local mechanic only 3 days after Daniel disappeared. The report existed in the evidence index. But the actual statement was gone. No explanation. No replacement. Just an empty gap. Investigators assumed clerical error. Daniel's mother refused to accept that answer. She demanded copies. None existed. Who removed it? Nobody knew. The mechanic himself had died in 1987. His memories disappeared with him. Another door closed forever. The file returned to storage. Cold. Silent. Forgotten. Or so everyone believed. Because 40 years later, construction crews widening an old state highway uncovered something buried beneath layers of compacted earth. Not bones. Not clothing. Not a weapon. A rusted metal toolbox. Inside lay ordinary tools blackened by moisture. A cracked flashlight. Several bolts. An oil rag. And a tiny folded envelope sealed beneath decades of dirt. The workers nearly threw everything away. One supervisor opened the envelope. Inside rested a faded Polaroid photograph. The image showed 3 men standing beside a pickup truck at night. One smiled. One looked away. The third face had been scratched almost completely off. On the back, written in blue ink now barely readable, were 6 words. Don't forget what happened Friday night. No date. No signature. Detectives immediately recognized the pickup. Or rather, what remained visible. The rear bumper carried an unusual dent identical to one visible in photographs of Daniel Mercer's missing truck. The discovery electrified investigators. News stations interrupted broadcasts. Newspapers printed familiar words across their front pages. Utah cold case reopened. Missing clue found after 4 decades. Families who had nearly forgotten the story suddenly remembered where they had been in 1982. Old witnesses began calling again. Some admitted they had stayed silent out of fear. Others confessed they had never trusted local authorities. One anonymous caller delivered a sentence that froze everyone listening. You've been searching for the wrong man. Then the line went dead. Detectives traced nothing. Disposable phone. No fingerprints. No recordings beyond the chilling message itself. Still, momentum returned. Boxes reopened. Evidence resurfaced. Modern forensic specialists examined every surviving object from the original investigation, including the boots. For decades they had seemed worthless. Handled repeatedly. Stored improperly. Contaminated by countless investigators. Few believed they still held secrets. Few imagined the answer had been waiting in silence since the autumn afternoon those boots first appeared beside an empty Utah highway, untouched except for one impossibly small detail nobody in 1982 possessed the technology to recognize. A detail hidden beneath years of dust, beneath cracked leather, beneath assumptions that had guided an entire investigation in the wrong direction from the very beginning. A single overlooked trace that refused to disappear even as memories faded, witnesses died, and the case itself became another forgotten headline buried deep inside America's growing archive of unsolved mysteries. The laboratory fell silent the moment the magnified image appeared on the monitor. 4 decades had reduced the leather to cracked layers of dust and hardened fibers, but buried deep inside the stitching, protected from sunlight and weather, a fragment remained untouched. It was no larger than the head of a pin. Invisible in 1982. Impossible to identify with the technology available then. Now it demanded attention. The forensic examiner leaned closer. Stop. No one spoke. The fragment was neither soil nor dried blood. It reflected light with a faint metallic shimmer. Under higher magnification, it revealed itself as microscopic aluminum residue mixed with industrial lubricant, the kind commonly found inside heavy manufacturing equipment. Detectives exchanged confused looks. Daniel Mercer had never worked in a factory that handled aluminum processing. His warehouse dealt with lumber, cement, and roofing supplies. Nothing in his daily routine explained the contamination. Unless he had been somewhere else. That single realization changed everything. Boxes sealed since the Reagan administration were carried back into the evidence room. Every interview transcript, every blurry photograph, every handwritten note was scanned again with fresh eyes. Details dismissed decades earlier suddenly carried weight. A deputy's scribbled observation about a strange chemical smell near the abandoned boots. A volunteer searcher's comment about fresh tire marks leading toward an old industrial district. None of it had mattered in 1982. Now it did. The investigation shifted east. Not toward the desert. Toward a forgotten industrial complex that had once employed hundreds before closing in the late 80s. Most buildings had been demolished years ago. Rusted foundations remained buried beneath weeds and cracked concrete. Local teenagers treated the ruins as a place for late-night dares. Older residents avoided talking about it altogether. Records revealed something investigators had somehow overlooked. One of the companies leasing warehouse space, there had subcontracted transportation services from the same logistics firm where Daniel occasionally delivered construction materials. A coincidence, or the first real connection in 40 years. Detectives located payroll records preserved inside state archives. Hundreds of names filled the pages. Most meant nothing. One did. Victor Hale. Age 36 in 1982. Night supervisor. No criminal history. No mention anywhere inside the original investigation. That made no sense. If Daniel had visited the complex regularly, why had detectives never interviewed the supervisor responsible for overnight operations? The answer arrived 2 days later. Victor Hale had died in 1989. Official cause: single vehicle accident on a mountain road. No witnesses. No autopsy beyond routine examination. The file closed within 48 hours. Another dead end. Or another convenient ending. The case gathered momentum faster than anyone expected. National media returned. Satellite trucks crowded outside the sheriff's office. Headlines exploded across television screens. Utah 1982 cold case reopened. New forensic discovery stuns investigators. The public responded immediately. Tips flooded the hotline. Most were useless. Some were bizarre. One stood apart. An elderly woman from Nevada claimed she had worked as a waitress at a truck stop outside Salt Lake City during the autumn of 1982. She remembered serving Daniel Mercer only once. He wasn't alone. There were 3 men, she said. One looked terrified. The other 2 kept watching the parking lot. She remembered the frightened man because he barely touched his coffee. His hands shook constantly. Every few seconds he looked toward the entrance, as if expecting someone to walk in. She identified Daniel from a newspaper photograph without hesitation. Then she added one sentence that froze the interview room. He whispered, "If they know I talked, I'm dead." No one knew who they were. She couldn't remember the faces of the other men. Only their silence. And one unusual detail. A silver pickup parked outside carried fresh scratches across the driver's door. Investigators searched old DMV databases. Thousands of silver pickups. Thousands of owners. Nothing. Another lead threatened to disappear beneath paperwork. Then an analyst reviewing aerial photographs noticed something strange. The abandoned industrial complex had once included a secondary storage building absent from modern maps. It had been demolished less than a year after Daniel vanished. No explanation. No permit describing why. Only a demolition order signed unusually quickly. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed across the site. The first scans revealed nothing. The second scan stopped everyone cold. A rectangular void, roughly the size of a pickup truck, buried beneath nearly 12 feet of compacted earth. Heavy machinery arrived before sunrise. Television helicopters circled overhead. Residents gathered behind police tape. Every scoop of dirt carried 40 years of expectation. Hours passed. Nothing. Then the excavator operator struck metal. Not a vehicle. A steel container. The box emerged coated in thick clay, its hinges fused shut by rust. Forensic technicians pried it open under cameras, recording every movement. Inside lay water-damaged documents, rotting cloth, an empty revolver holster, and dozens of payroll ledgers from businesses that had vanished decades earlier. At first glance, they appeared worthless, until investigators noticed entire pages missing. Someone had deliberately removed names. Someone had wanted history rewritten. As detectives cataloged the evidence, another discovery surfaced almost by accident. Pressed between 2 swollen ledger pages rested a folded road map. One location had been circled repeatedly in red ink. An abandoned quarry nearly 20 miles south. Search teams moved before dawn. The quarry had changed little since 1982. Steep cliffs surrounded deep pools of dark water. Wind echoed through broken stone walls. It felt isolated even in daylight. Divers entered first. Visibility measured less than 2 feet. Cold. Black. Silent. Hours later, one diver surfaced holding something wrapped in mud. A rusted license plate. The numbers matched a registration once assigned to Daniel Mercer's missing pickup. The crowd fell silent. For the first time in 40 years, investigators possessed undeniable proof that Daniel's truck had reached the quarry. But where was the truck? Where was Daniel? And why had someone hidden only the plate? The answers remained buried somewhere beneath layers of stone, water, and lies that had survived 4 decades, while every new discovery suggested the disappearance had never been the work of a stranger passing through the Utah desert. It had unfolded among people who knew one another, trusted one another, and spent years pretending that nothing had happened on that cold October night in 1982. Even as a single forgotten clue waited patiently beneath cracked leather, refusing to disappear until science, time, and persistence finally forced the past back into the light. The discovery of the license plate changed the entire investigation overnight. For 40 years, Daniel Mercer's disappearance had been treated like a mystery without a location. A man who vanished. A truck that vanished. A life that disappeared into empty space. But now investigators had something they never had before. A destination. The quarry. A place hidden in plain sight. The old reports were pulled from storage again. Every page was examined. Every photograph was enlarged. Every sentence written by detectives in 1982 was questioned. And one detail suddenly stood out. The quarry had been searched before. But only once. A single patrol unit had driven past the entrance 5 days after Daniel disappeared. Officers saw no abandoned vehicle. No obvious evidence. They marked the location as clear and moved on. That decision haunted retired investigators decades later. Because the quarry was not empty. It was waiting. The search team returned with advanced equipment. Sonar scanners swept the dark water below the cliffs. Drones flew over the abandoned roads. Ground crews examined every inch of surrounding land. Then, 3 days into the operation, a sonar image appeared. Something large rested beneath the deepest section of the quarry lake. The shape was unmistakable. A vehicle. Divers entered the water just after sunrise. The temperature was brutal. Visibility was almost zero. Every movement created clouds of disturbed sediment that swallowed their lights. For several minutes, there was nothing. Then the radio crackled. Contact. Everyone watching froze. The divers had found the missing truck. Buried beneath decades of mud and water, Daniel Mercer's pickup sat exactly where someone had left it. The vehicle was recovered slowly. Every piece mattered. The doors were sealed shut by corrosion. The windows were cracked. The interior was destroyed by time. But inside the cab, investigators discovered something unexpected. A wallet. Not Daniel's wallet. Someone else's. The identification card inside belonged to a man named Richard Cole. A name that meant nothing in 1982. A name that suddenly became central in 2026. Detectives searched the archives. Richard Cole had been questioned once during the original investigation. Once. Then forgotten. His interview lasted 11 minutes. The notes were brief. Former co-worker of missing person. Denies involvement. Cooperative. That was it. No follow-up. No background investigation. No reason recorded for why his name appeared in the file. But the new evidence told a different story. Richard Cole had been inside Daniel's truck. And nobody had asked why. Investigators tracked down Cole's surviving relatives. They learned he had left Utah shortly after Daniel disappeared. Not years later. Not gradually. Within 2 weeks. He sold his house. Quit his job. Changed his phone number. Moved across state lines. At the time, nobody connected the timing. Now the timeline looked impossible to ignore. A cold case that had remained frozen for decades began moving faster than anyone expected. Then came another discovery. Inside the recovered truck, beneath the driver's seat, forensic technicians found a small piece of fabric caught in a broken metal bracket. The material was dark blue. Laboratory testing revealed traces of human DNA. The sample was degraded. But modern technology could still attempt what investigators in 1982 never dreamed possible. A genetic profile. The result would take weeks. Those weeks became unbearable. Every news channel followed the investigation. Every newspaper carried the same question. Who was Richard Cole? The answer was complicated. Cole had been Daniel's friend. Not just a coworker. A close friend. They had hunted together. Shared road trips. Celebrated birthdays. Their families knew each other, which raised a terrifying possibility. Had Daniel trusted the wrong person? Investigators reopened interviews with everyone connected to the two men, and one witness finally revealed something she had kept hidden for decades. Daniel's former girlfriend remembered seeing Richard at Daniel's house the night before he disappeared. She had never mentioned it because she thought it was irrelevant, but now she remembered the argument. Daniel was angry. Richard was nervous. The conversation ended with Daniel saying one sentence. "You promised me nobody else would know." Nobody else would know what? That question became the center of the investigation. Detectives searched Richard Cole's history. They found financial problems, secret debts, unreported business dealings, and one mysterious connection: a construction company owner named Thomas Voss. Voss had operated several warehouses in the area during 1982, including one near the industrial complex, where Daniel may have encountered the unknown men from the waitress's story. The investigation expanded. Suddenly, the case was no longer about one missing man. It was about a network of people who had spent 40 years avoiding the same question. What happened on that October night? Then investigators received the DNA results. The laboratory report arrived just after midnight. A detective opened the email alone. He expected uncertainty. He expected another dead end. Instead, he found something that changed everything. The DNA found inside Daniel's truck belonged to Richard Cole, the man who disappeared from Utah shortly after Daniel, the man whose wallet was found inside the vehicle, the man who had never been considered a suspect. For the first time in 40 years, investigators had a direct connection. But the biggest shock was still hidden, because Richard Cole was not the only person whose DNA appeared in the truck. A second unidentified profile was discovered. Someone else had been there. Someone who had never been named. Someone who had escaped every interview, every search, every theory. And as detectives began digging deeper into the forgotten records of 1982, they uncovered a detail that suggested Daniel Mercer may not have disappeared because he found a secret. He may have disappeared because someone realized Daniel was about to reveal it. The name Richard Cole changed the direction of the investigation, but it did not answer the question that had haunted Cedar Valley for 4 decades. It created a bigger one. If Richard Cole was involved, why had he never been caught? Why had he allowed investigators to question him? Why had he kept Daniel's wallet inside the very truck that could eventually expose him? The detectives reviewing the case knew one thing. People who commit crimes make mistakes. But some mistakes are buried so deeply that they wait decades before anyone notices. And Richard Cole had left behind more than one. The investigation moved backward through time. Every hour of Richard Cole's life in 1982 was reconstructed. His workplace, his phone calls, his financial records, his friendships, his movements. A picture slowly began to form. Richard was not the confident businessman people remembered. Behind the calm personality was a man drowning in problems. His small construction supply company was collapsing. Bills were unpaid. Equipment loans were overdue. Several employees had complained about missing payments. But one person kept helping him. Thomas Voss, the same man connected to the abandoned industrial warehouse. Voss had money, connections, influence. He was known around town as someone who could solve problems. Some people called him successful. Others called him dangerous. During the original investigation, nobody looked closely at him. Why? Because Voss was never officially connected to Daniel's disappearance. There were no witnesses, no evidence, no reason to suspect him. Until now. A retired detective named Frank Holloway remembered something he had never forgotten. A conversation with Daniel's father 2 weeks before Daniel disappeared. Daniel had apparently told his father he was worried about something at work. Not scared. Worried. There was a difference. He believed someone was hiding money. Something involving shipments. Something involving fake records. At the time, his father assumed it was workplace drama. A young man complaining about problems he could not control. Now investigators wondered if Daniel had accidentally discovered something much bigger. The warehouse records from 1982 became the next target. Most had been destroyed, but not all. A forgotten archive box from the county storage facility contained shipping documents from the months before Daniel vanished. Investigators found irregularities immediately. Several shipments were recorded, but the delivery signatures did not match. Names appeared that did not exist. Numbers were altered. Dates were changed, and one signature appeared repeatedly. Daniel Mercer. Except the handwriting was not his. Someone had forged his name. The missing man had become part of a scheme without even knowing it. Detectives now believed Daniel discovered the fraud. And someone panicked. The theory was simple. Daniel confronted the wrong people. The confrontation turned deadly. But theories were not enough. They needed proof. They searched for more information about Thomas Voss. The problem was that Voss had disappeared too. Not missing. Not officially. He simply left. In 1991, he sold his properties and moved out of state. No criminal charges. No investigation. No public attention. Just another person walking away from a mystery. Detectives located him living quietly under a different business name. At 79 years old, Thomas Voss agreed to speak. The interview lasted 40 minutes. He denied knowing anything about Daniel's disappearance. He denied involvement with illegal activity. He denied knowing Richard Cole closely. But then detectives placed one photograph on the table. A picture recovered from the old toolbox. 3 men beside a pickup truck. Daniel. Richard. And a third person. Thomas Voss. For the first time, the calm expression disappeared. The room went silent. Voss looked at the photograph for several seconds. Then he said something unexpected. I told him not to get involved. Investigators leaned forward. Who? Voss stared at the picture. Daniel. That was the first crack. The first moment after 40 years where someone admitted Daniel had been closer to danger than anyone realized. But Voss still refused to explain. He claimed Daniel was asking questions. Too many questions. He claimed Richard Cole was afraid. He claimed he tried to stop things from escalating. But he would not say what things meant. Then he delivered the sentence that changed the entire case. Richard wasn't the one who made the decision. The detectives froze. Who did? Voss looked toward the window. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered a name. A name investigators had never seen in the original file. A name that had been missing for 40 years. Martin Kissler. The moment the name entered the investigation, detectives searched every database. The result was shocking. Martin Kessler had worked security at the industrial warehouse in 1982. He had signed several night access reports. He had been present during the exact week Daniel disappeared. But his name was absent from every original interview list. Not overlooked. Removed. Someone had erased him. The question became impossible to ignore. Who protected Martin Kessler? And why? Investigators searched deeper. They found that Kessler died in 2003. But before his death, he had left behind a storage unit. Inside were old photographs, documents, and personal belongings. The unit had remained untouched for years. Until now. When detectives opened the door, they found hundreds of items covered in dust. Boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. Most were worthless. Old newspapers. Clothing. Receipts. Then, hidden beneath a false compartment inside a wooden cabinet, investigators found a small cassette tape. No label. No date. Only 3 words written on the side. For the truth. The recording was damaged. The audio was weak. But after restoration, a voice emerged. A voice that had waited more than 40 years to be heard. The recording began with a man breathing heavily. Then one sentence. If anyone finds this, Daniel was right. The investigators stopped the playback. They knew immediately. They were no longer searching for a missing person. They were uncovering a secret someone had spent a lifetime trying to bury. And on that old cassette tape, hidden away inside a forgotten storage unit, was the first real confession connected to Utah's most disturbing cold case. The cassette tape was placed inside the evidence room before sunrise. No cameras. No reporters. No public announcement. Investigators knew the value of what they had found. After 40 years of silence, They finally possessed something that could either break the case wide open or become another painful dead end. The audio technician worked for 14 straight hours. The tape had suffered decades of damage. Moisture. Magnetic decay. Age. The voice was buried beneath layers of static. Every second had to be carefully restored. Then, at 3:17 a.m., the first clear sentence emerged. If this recording is being played, then I am already gone. The room became silent. The voice belonged to Martin Kessler, the former warehouse security officer, the man whose name had vanished from the original investigation, the man who had watched the warehouse gates on the night Daniel Mercer disappeared. The recording continued. I should have told the truth years ago. A pause. A long breath. Then another sentence. Daniel found the records. Investigators exchanged looks. The theory was no longer a theory. Daniel had discovered something. But the recording revealed something far more disturbing. Kessler explained that the warehouse was not just being used for normal construction shipments. He claimed certain deliveries were being manipulated. Invoices were changed. Materials were moved without documentation. Money disappeared. At first, Daniel thought it was simple fraud. A financial crime. Something that could be reported. Something that could be stopped. But according to Kessler, Daniel made one mistake. He trusted the wrong people. The recording described a meeting days before Daniel vanished. Daniel confronted Richard Cole. He demanded answers. He wanted to know why his name appeared on documents he never signed. Why shipments connected to his work were being altered. Why Thomas Voss kept appearing in records he should never have seen. Richard promised to explain. But he never did. Instead, he brought Daniel to a meeting that would become the final confirmed sighting of Daniel Mercer alive. Kessler's voice became quieter. The night Daniel disappeared, I was at the warehouse. The investigators leaned closer. I saw them arrive. 3 vehicles. Daniel's truck. Richard's car. And Thomas Voss's pickup. But there was someone else. Someone who controlled the situation. Martin Kessler named him. A man who had spent 40 years hidden from the investigation. A man who was never officially questioned. The recording stopped for several seconds. Then continued. Martin was not supposed to be there. Detectives immediately paused the audio. They checked the name. Martin Kessler was speaking about someone named Martin? No. The sentence was unclear. The restoration team enhanced the audio again. After hours of analysis, they reached the same conclusion. Kessler had said, Marcus was not supposed to be there. Marcus. Not Martin. Another name. Another person. Another shadow from the night Daniel vanished. The search began immediately. County records. Employment files. Old photographs. Anything connected to the warehouse. And then they found him. Marcus Valli. Former equipment operator. Worked at the warehouse for 8 years. Left the company shortly after Daniel disappeared. No criminal record. No police contacts. No mention in the original case. Just another forgotten name. Except one detail changed everything. Marcus Vale had purchased the same type of silver pickup truck described by the waitress who saw Daniel at the truck stop. A silver pickup with scratches on the driver's door. The same detail nobody thought mattered in 1982. Investigators located the vehicle registration history. The truck had been sold in 1985. Then sold again. Then abandoned. Eventually, it was destroyed. Another dead end. But detectives were learning something important. Every path connected back to the same group of people. Daniel. Richard. Thomas. Marcus. 4 men. One night. One secret. The question was no longer what happened to Daniel. The question was why so many people helped hide it. The investigation turned toward Marcus Vale. His current address was discovered within hours. But when detectives arrived, the house was empty. Neighbors said Marcus had lived there quietly for years. No visitors. No parties. No trouble. A normal life. Almost too normal. Inside the house, detectives found something strange. A wall covered with newspaper clippings. Every article connected to Daniel Mercer's disappearance. Every anniversary story. Every investigation update. Every mention of the cold case. Marcus had been following the case, watching from a distance. But he had not just been reading. He had been collecting. Behind a bookshelf, investigators discovered a hidden compartment. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures from 1982. The warehouse. The quarry. The highway. And Daniel Mercer. Alive. Standing beside the people who would become connected to his disappearance. The final photograph shocked investigators. It showed Daniel standing beside Richard Cole and Marcus Vale near the quarry entrance. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten message. 3 words. He knows everything. But who was he? Daniel? Marcus? Someone else? The discovery created another wave of questions, because the photographs proved something impossible. Someone had been documenting Daniel's final days. Someone close enough to take pictures. Someone who knew exactly what was happening. The case exploded again. News headlines appeared across the country. 40-year cold case takes shocking turn. Hidden photos reveal unknown connection. Families of the missing man gathered outside the sheriff's office. Daniel's brother, Michael, who had spent decades believing he would never know the truth, finally spoke publicly. He wasn't forgotten, he said. Someone just wanted everyone to forget. The investigation moved faster. Subpoenas were issued. Old financial records were reopened. Former employees were interviewed. And then detectives discovered something buried inside Richard Cole's old banking history. A large payment, received 1 week after Daniel disappeared. The sender? A company owned by Thomas Voss. The amount? Exactly enough for Richard to leave Utah forever. The money trail was finally appearing. But investigators still lacked the one thing every cold case depends on. A confession. And as detectives prepared to confront the remaining people connected to Daniel's disappearance, another discovery emerged from the recovered truck. A hidden compartment beneath the dashboard. Inside was a small object wrapped in plastic. A piece of evidence untouched since 1982. Something Daniel himself may have hidden before he vanished. Something that could reveal the final moments of his life. And when investigators opened the package, they found a handwritten note. Only 4 lines. Only one sentence mattered. If something happens to me, don't trust Richard. The man Daniel trusted most may have been the person he feared the most. And after 40 years, the truth was finally beginning to surface. The note changed everything. For decades of uncertainty had been reduced to 4 handwritten lines. A warning from a man who knew something was coming. Daniel Mercer had not simply vanished. He had been afraid. The question investigators now faced was the same question that had haunted the case since the beginning. What did Daniel know? And how close was he to exposing it? The handwriting was examined immediately. Experts compared the note against dozens of verified examples from Daniel's personal records. Old letters, employment forms, birthday cards, bank documents. The result was clear. The handwriting belonged to Daniel. There was no doubt. The note was real. The fear was real. The danger was real. But the timing remained unknown. When did Daniel write it? Before the meeting? During the night he disappeared? Or moments before everything went wrong? Investigators returned to the recovered truck. The dashboard compartment where the note was found had been sealed shut by corrosion for 40 years. Nobody in 1982 discovered it. Nobody in the original investigation knew it existed. Daniel had hidden it intentionally. He had planned for the possibility that he might not return. That single detail transformed him from a missing person into someone who believed his own life was in immediate danger. The investigation focused on Richard Cole, the man named directly in Daniel's final warning. But Richard was dead. He had died 7 years earlier from a heart condition in a small town hundreds of miles away. Another suspect removed from the courtroom before the truth could reach it. However, investigators discovered something unusual. Before his death, Richard had written several letters. Most were ordinary. Bills. Family matters. Personal notes. But one letter was never sent. It was found inside a locked drawer after his death. The envelope had no address. No recipient. Only one word written on the front. Daniel. The letter was opened under forensic supervision. Inside was a confession of fear. Not a confession of murder. A confession of guilt. Richard wrote that he had made the worst decision of his life. He claimed he had wanted to protect Daniel, but instead, he helped place him in danger. One line stood out. I thought they would only scare him. Investigators stared at the sentence. They had spent decades searching for a killer. Now they were looking at something different. A group. A plan. A mistake that went further than anyone intended. The next question was obvious. Who were they? The answer seemed to point back to Thomas Voss. But Voss continued denying involvement. When confronted with Richard's letter, he changed his story. For the first time, he admitted he knew Daniel. He admitted Daniel had discovered financial problems inside the warehouse operation. But he insisted he never wanted Daniel harmed. I wanted him quiet, Voss said. The detectives listening to the interview knew those words mattered. Quiet. Not gone. Not dead. Quiet. A phrase often used by people trying to hide something. The investigation moved toward the night Daniel disappeared. Using phone records, witness statements, and old vehicle registrations, detectives reconstructed the final hours. October 14th, 1982. 5:12 p.m. Daniel left work. 5:47 p.m. He purchased gasoline. 6:30 p.m. He stopped at a grocery store. 7:15 p.m. His truck was seen heading toward the industrial area. 8:03 p.m. Richard Cole arrived at the warehouse. 8:20 p.m. Thomas Voss arrived. 8:41 p.m. A third vehicle entered the property. Marcus Valli. After that, nothing. No witnesses. No confirmed sightings. Just silence. Until the quarry. The recovered truck proved Daniel reached that location. But investigators still did not know what happened there. Then forensic teams made another breakthrough. Inside the truck's damaged interior, they found traces of a second location. Small particles of crushed stone. Not from the quarry. From somewhere else. The material contained a rare mineral combination found only in a few areas around Cedar Valley. One location matched perfectly. An abandoned mine outside town. The same mine where Daniel's missing boots had originally been discovered nearby. Suddenly, the case returned to where it began. The desert. The empty highway. The boots standing alone. Investigators searched the abandoned mine again. This time with technology unavailable in 1982. Ground radar. Advanced mapping. Thermal scanning. For 3 days, nothing appeared. Then, beneath a collapsed section of rock, they found a small metal object. A watch. A stainless steel watch. Daniel's family immediately recognized it. The birthday gift from his father. The watch that had vanished for 40 years. The discovery was devastating, because it proved something Daniel's family had feared. He never left Utah. He never started a new life. He never walked away. The man they had searched for was always there. Hidden somewhere in the landscape he knew. The investigation became a recovery operation. The mine was sealed. Search crews worked through the night. Then, just before sunrise, they discovered a hidden chamber beneath the collapsed rock. Inside were remains. The discovery ended 40 years of uncertainty. But it created a new storm of questions. Because alongside Daniel's remains were objects that should not have been there. A wallet. A key. A piece of fabric. And a photograph. The photograph showed 4 men standing outside the warehouse. Daniel. Richard. Thomas. Marcus. But someone had written on the back. A message dated the day after Daniel disappeared. Only one of them told the truth. Detectives realized the case was not a simple cover-up. Someone inside the group had been hiding information from the others. Someone had betrayed the betrayal. The investigation turned again. Who left the message? Who wanted the truth discovered? And why wait 40 years? As investigators examined every piece of evidence recovered from the mine, one final discovery emerged. A fingerprint. A single fingerprint preserved on an object buried beside Daniel. A fingerprint that did not belong to Richard Cole. Did not belong to Thomas Voss. Did not belong to Marcus Vale. It belonged to someone investigators had never suspected. A name that would shock the entire community. A name that had appeared nowhere in the case file. Until now. And when detectives entered that name into the database, the result sent the cold case investigation into its most shocking chapter yet. The fingerprint changed the case forever. For 40 years, investigators had followed the same names. Richard Cole, Thomas Voss, Marcus Vale. 3 men connected by secrets, money, and a night that ended with Daniel Mercer disappearing into the darkness. But the fingerprint belonged to someone else. Someone outside the original investigation. Someone who had never been considered a suspect. The forensic examiner stared at the database result for several seconds before calling the lead detective. The match was confirmed. The print belonged to Deputy Alan Pierce, a name that immediately silenced the room. Because Alan Pierce was not a stranger. He was one of the first officers who responded when Daniel Mercer was reported missing. He was one of the deputies who searched the highway where the boots were found. He was one of the people responsible for preserving the evidence. And according to the records, he was one of the men who helped decide the case had no clear direction. Now his fingerprint had appeared beside Daniel's remains. 40 years later, the impossible question returned. How? The first assumption was contamination. The fingerprint could have been left during the original investigation. A mistake. An accident. Something innocent. But the location of the print destroyed that theory. It was found on an object recovered from the hidden chamber. An object that had never been documented in 1982. A small metal box sealed beneath layers of rock and dirt. A box that nobody knew existed. A box that contained Daniel's final evidence. Inside were 3 items. A damaged cassette recorder. Several handwritten pages. And a photograph. The photograph showed the warehouse on the night Daniel disappeared. But the most shocking detail was not the image. It was the writing on the back. A message. Signed by Alan Pierce. I know what happened. The investigation that had already shocked Utah was now facing something much darker. The person who was supposed to find the truth may have been the person who helped bury it. News of the discovery spread rapidly. The public reaction was immediate. Residents who remembered Daniel's disappearance were stunned. Many had trusted Deputy Pierce. He had been seen as one of the few people trying to solve the case. An officer who spent years claiming he wanted answers. Now investigators had to ask whether he had spent those years protecting a secret. The department reopened every action Pierce took in 1982. Every report. Every decision. Every piece of evidence he handled. And then they found something strange. The original evidence inventory had a missing entry. A box. Recovered from Daniel's truck. Never logged. Never photographed. Never tested. Just gone. The discovery created a terrifying possibility. Someone had removed evidence from the beginning. Not years later. Not after the investigation failed. At the very start. The case had not gone cold because investigators found nothing. It had gone cold because someone made sure they never found everything. Detectives searched Alan Pierce's history. He had served as a deputy for 30 years. No major complaints. No criminal accusations. A respected officer. A family man. The kind of person nobody wanted to suspect. But old cases are often solved by looking at the people everyone trusted. Not just the people everyone feared. Investigators interviewed Pierce's former colleagues. One retired deputy remembered something unusual. The morning after Daniel disappeared, Pierce arrived at the station before his shift began. He was carrying a folder. The deputy asked what it was. Pierce replied, "Something I need to handle." The folder was never mentioned again. Another officer remembered Pierce arguing with Sheriff Benson days later. The argument became so heated that others were asked to leave the room. Nobody knew what was said. Until now. Because the sheriff's private notes were discovered in an old personal archive. One sentence had been underlined. Pierce knows more than he admits. The note was dated October 22, 1982. 8 days after Daniel disappeared. The investigation had its first major internal failure. Someone inside law enforcement had been suspicious. But nobody followed the suspicion. The question was why? Fear? Pressure? Or something worse? Detectives located Alan Pierce's widow. She agreed to speak. She had one thing to say before the interview started. "My husband carried that case with him until the day he died." That sentence surprised investigators. because Alan Pierce had died in 2014. A heart attack. Sudden. Unexpected. But his widow revealed something never reported. Before his death, Pierce became obsessed with old files, especially Daniel's case. He spent nights in his office reviewing documents. He stopped talking about retirement. He stopped sleeping. And according to his wife, he repeated the same phrase again and again. I should have told the truth. Investigators searched the Pierce family home with permission. They found dozens of old case documents. Some were legal copies. Some were personal notes. But hidden inside a locked drawer was something impossible. A handwritten confession. Not complete. Not signed, but clearly written by Alan Pierce. The first line was enough. Daniel Mercer was alive when I left the mine. The detectives stopped reading. The sentence changed everything. Because until that moment, they believed Daniel died during the confrontation. Now a new timeline appeared. Daniel survived. Someone found him. Someone moved him. Someone hid the truth. The confession continued. Pierce wrote that on the night Daniel disappeared, he received a call from Richard Cole. Richard claimed Daniel had been injured. He asked for help. Pierce went to the abandoned mine expecting to prevent a tragedy. Instead, he found Daniel alive, barely conscious, terrified. Daniel told him everything. The warehouse, the forged documents, the missing money, the people involved. But most importantly, Daniel gave him one warning. A warning that Pierce carried for the rest of his life. Don't trust anyone who says this was an accident. Investigators reached the final page of the confession. But the page was missing. Torn away. The last words Alan Pierce wrote were incomplete. Only one sentence remained. The person who planned everything was. And then nothing. The missing page became the most important piece of evidence in the entire investigation. Because someone had removed it. Recently. Not 40 years ago. The paper edges were fresh. Someone had accessed Alan Pierce's hidden documents before investigators arrived. Someone knew the confession existed. Someone was still protecting the truth. And as detectives searched for the missing page, they discovered a chilling fact. The last person to enter Alan Pierce's storage room before police arrived was not a stranger. It was someone connected to Daniel Mercer. Someone who had spent 40 years pretending to want justice. Someone who may have known the truth all along. The missing page became the center of the investigation. A single sheet of paper. A few missing sentences. But inside those torn edges was the name investigators believed could finally explain everything. For 40 years, people had asked the same question. Who was responsible for Daniel Mercer's disappearance? Now the answer seemed to have been written down by the one person who was there when Daniel was still alive. Deputy Alan Pierce. But someone had removed the final piece. Someone had entered the storage room. Someone had searched through the confession. And someone had taken the only evidence that could reveal the truth. Investigators began rebuilding the final days before the discovery. The timeline was disturbing. Alan Pierce's hidden documents had remained untouched for years. His family knew about the storage room. Friends knew he kept old files. But nobody had searched it. Until the week before police arrived. Security cameras from a nearby business provided a small but important clue. A vehicle had been parked outside the storage facility at 2:14 a.m. A dark sedan. The driver remained inside for nearly 20 minutes. Then the vehicle disappeared. The license plate was partially captured. Enough for investigators to identify the registered owner. The name shocked everyone. Michael Mercer. Daniel's younger brother. The man who had spent 40 years demanding answers. The man who publicly blamed the investigation for failing Daniel. The man who stood beside the Mercer family every year as they remembered the missing man. Now his name appeared beside the biggest unanswered question. Why was Michael Mercer searching Alan Pierce's storage room? Investigators contacted him immediately. At first, Michael denied everything. He said he had never been near the facility. He said the investigation was trying to destroy the wrong person. But the evidence was clear. The vehicle. The time. The location. The lie. After hours of questioning, Michael finally admitted he had been there. But he claimed he did not steal anything. He claimed he was searching for answers. I spent 40 years waiting for someone else to tell me the truth, he said. I got tired of waiting. Detectives asked one question. What did you find? Michael looked down. He refused to answer. That silence mattered, because investigators knew something had changed. Michael was not just searching. He was hiding something. The detectives returned to the Mercer family history. Daniel and Michael had been close. But after Daniel disappeared, their relationship with their parents changed. Their father blamed himself. Their mother blamed everyone. And Michael became obsessed with the case. He collected newspaper articles, tracked every investigation update, contacted retired officers. But there was one strange detail. Michael had never publicly mentioned Alan Pierce. Not once. Even though Pierce was one of the original investigators. Why? The answer came from an old photograph. A family photo taken in 1981, 1 year before Daniel vanished. Standing in the background was Alan Pierce. Not in uniform. Not as an officer. As a family friend. The photograph revealed something nobody knew. Pierce had known the Mercer family for years. He was not just the deputy assigned to the case. He was someone Daniel trusted. Someone the family trusted. And that meant his confession carried even more weight. But it also raised another question. Why did Pierce hide the truth? Fear? Guilt? Or protection? The investigation returned to the missing page. Forensic specialists examined the confession. The paper fibers showed the page was removed recently. Not by age. Not by damage. Someone physically tore it away. The person who removed it knew exactly what they were looking for. Then detectives found another clue. A fingerprint on the remaining edge of the confession. Not Alan Pierce. Not Michael Mercer. Not anyone previously connected to the case. A new fingerprint. A new name. The print belonged to Ethan Vale, the son of Marcus Vale, the former warehouse worker whose name had appeared throughout the investigation. Ethan Vale was never part of the original case. He was only a child in 1982, but his connection was impossible to ignore, because records showed Ethan had recently contacted Michael Mercer. Several times. The two men had exchanged messages. Private conversations. Unexplained meetings. The investigation suddenly expanded again. Michael Mercer. Ethan Vale. The missing page. The hidden confession. A secret passed from one generation to another. Detectives tracked down Ethan Vale. He agreed to meet. Unlike others involved in the case, Ethan did not deny knowing about Daniel. He admitted his father had spoken about the disappearance. But he insisted Marcus Vale was not the person everyone believed. My father made mistakes, Ethan said. But he wasn't the one who decided Daniel had to disappear. The detectives asked who did. Ethan refused. He said the answer was written on the missing page. The page his father had spent decades trying to find. Then Ethan revealed something even more disturbing. Marcus Vale had not kept quiet because he was protecting himself. He had kept quiet because he was protecting someone else. Someone still alive. Someone who had more power than anyone realized. Someone who had manipulated Richard Cole, controlled Thomas Voss, silenced Martin Kissler, and convinced Alan Pierce to bury the truth. The detectives asked Ethan one final question. Who? He looked at them. Then answered. The person who started everything. Before leaving, Ethan handed investigators a small envelope. He said it was the last thing his father left behind. Inside was a photograph. The same warehouse. The same night. The same group of men. But this time, there was something different. A fifth person appeared in the background, standing near the entrance, watching. A person nobody had ever mentioned. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten name. A name that made investigators freeze. Because it belonged to someone who had been part of the investigation from the very beginning. Someone who had spent decades appearing to search for answers. Someone who may have known the truth before anyone else. And when detectives compared the handwriting on the photograph with the missing confession, they discovered something impossible. The writing matched. The person who removed the final page had left behind a signature. Not a name. A mistake. A mistake that would finally expose the person who had controlled Utah's darkest cold case for 40 years. The handwriting match turned the investigation upside down. For decades, Investigators believed the truth had disappeared with the people involved. Richard Cole was dead. Thomas Voss was elderly. Marcus Vail was gone. Martin Kessler had taken his secrets to the grave. But now the case had something different. A pattern. A connection. A mistake made by someone who believed time had erased every trace. The handwriting on the photograph belonged to the same person who wrote notes inside Alan Pierce's confession. The same person who removed the final page. The same person who had been quietly moving through the shadows of the investigation for 40 years. The name was confirmed. Sheriff Harold Benson. The man who led the original investigation. The man who stood beside Daniel Mercer's family. The man who publicly promised the town that he would never stop searching. The revelation stunned everyone involved. Because Benson was not just part of the case. He was the face of it. Every news report from 1982 showed him standing in front of cameras, promising justice. Every newspaper quoted his words. Every anniversary, his name appeared beside the phrase, "We will find out what happened." But behind those statements was another story. A story hidden inside missing files, altered reports, and forgotten evidence. Investigators reopened Benson's records. At first, nothing appeared unusual. His career looked perfect. 35 years in law enforcement. Awards. Commendations. Community recognition. A reputation built over decades. But when detectives compared original documents with archived copies, they discovered something disturbing. Several reports had been changed. Not dramatically. Small changes. A witness name removed. A location altered. A time adjusted. The kind of changes that seem meaningless individually. But together, they redirected the entire investigation. The original search area. The original suspects. The original timeline. Everything had been quietly shifted. The investigation had not failed. It had been guided toward failure. Detectives searched Benson's personal records after his death. His family cooperated. They claimed they knew nothing about Daniel Mercer. But inside an old locked cabinet, investigators discovered dozens of files. Private files. Not police records. Personal copies of the Mercer investigation. Benson had kept everything. Photographs. Witness statements. Evidence lists. Even documents marked as missing. The man who claimed he had no answers had spent decades preserving every piece of the mystery. But one file mattered more than the rest. A document titled, October 14th, Final Report. It was never submitted. Never entered into official records. Inside were handwritten notes. Benson described arriving at the abandoned mine the night Daniel disappeared. Not the next day. Not during the official search. That night. Hours before anyone knew Daniel was missing. The timeline was impossible. How did Benson know where to go? Who called him? What did he see? The answer appeared in one sentence. I made a promise. A promise to whom? The next pages were damaged. Water stains. Torn edges. Missing sections. Almost as if someone wanted the document destroyed. But one paragraph remained readable. Benson wrote that Daniel was alive when he reached the mine. The same detail Alan Pierce had written. The same detail that changed everything. Daniel Mercer survived the confrontation. He had a chance. Someone could have saved him. But someone chose not to. Investigators continued reading. Benson described Daniel sitting on the ground, injured and terrified. Richard Cole was there. Thomas Voss was there. Marcus Vail was there. And another person. A person Benson refused to name. Instead, he wrote, the one who started this. Then came the sentence that shocked detectives. Daniel recognized him. That meant Daniel knew the person responsible. This was not a random attack. Not a stranger. Not a robbery. The person behind it was someone Daniel trusted. Someone close enough to know his routines. His fears. His secrets. The investigation moved toward the Mercer family. Not because Daniel's family was suspected, but because detectives needed to understand every relationship, every connection, every hidden detail. And then they discovered something unexpected. Daniel had been investigating more than warehouse fraud. He had been looking into a larger operation involving stolen construction contracts across multiple counties. Millions of dollars. Fake companies. False identities. The warehouse was only one piece. Thomas Voss was not the mastermind. Richard Cole was not the mastermind. They were small parts of something bigger. And Sheriff Benson had known. The reason became clear. Benson had not covered up the crime for money. He had covered it up because of fear. Years earlier, Benson's career had depended on political support from powerful people in the county. People connected to the construction industry. People who could destroy careers. People who could make problems disappear. But one question remained. Why protect them for 40 years? Why carry that burden until death? The answer came from Benson's final private recording. A cassette discovered hidden behind the wall of his home office. The audio was weak. His voice was old. But the message was clear. I thought I could control it. A pause. I thought I could protect everyone. Another pause. I was wrong. Benson admitted that the night Daniel disappeared, he made a deal. He would hide certain details. He would delay the investigation. He would protect certain names. In exchange, Daniel's family would never be targeted. But the deal failed. Because Daniel knew too much. And once Daniel knew, there was no way to put the secret back. The recording ended with Benson saying one final sentence. The person who killed Daniel was never the most dangerous person in the room. Investigators replayed that line again and again. Because Benson was right. The people they had spent years chasing were only pieces. The real power had been somewhere else. Watching. Waiting. Controlling the story. Then came the final discovery. Inside Benson's private files was a sealed envelope. Written on the front were 4 words. For Daniel's family. Inside was a single page. The missing page from Alan Pierce's confession. The page everyone thought was gone forever. And at the bottom of that page was the truth Benson had spent 40 years trying to bury. The name of the person who ordered Daniel Mercer's disappearance. The name that would finally explain why an entire town had lived with a lie for 4 decades. And when investigators read it, they realized the final secret of the Utah cold case had been hidden in the most obvious place all along. The page was only one sheet of paper. One fragile piece of evidence. For decades of silence had been compressed into a few handwritten paragraphs. Investigators gathered around the document inside the forensic examination room. No cameras. No reporters. No public announcement. Not yet. They knew the name written at the bottom could change everything. The paper was old. The ink had faded. But the words remained clear. Alan Pierce's final confession. The missing piece of Utah's darkest cold case. The first line was enough to stop everyone. I protected the wrong person. For years, investigators believed Alan Pierce had protected a group. Richard Cole. Thomas Voss. Marcos Valle. A network of people connected through money and fear. But the confession revealed something far more disturbing. Pierce had not protected criminals because he was loyal to them. He had protected someone because he believed that person could destroy everything. The next lines explained what happened on the night Daniel Mercer disappeared. After finding Daniel alive inside the abandoned mine, Pierce made a decision. A decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Daniel was injured. Confused. Terrified. But he was still conscious. He knew who had betrayed him. He knew who had arranged the meeting. He knew why he had been targeted. And according to Pierce, Daniel kept repeating one sentence. Nobody will believe me. At the time, Pierce thought Daniel was wrong. He believed the truth would eventually come out. He believed the law would win. He believed the people responsible would be exposed. But then he saw who arrived at the mine. And everything changed. Because the person who arrived was not Richard. Not Thomas. Not Marcus. It was someone Pierce had known for years. Someone with authority. Someone with influence. Someone who could control the entire investigation before it even began. The name at the bottom of the page was Governor William Hartley. The room went silent. A former state governor. A powerful political figure in Utah during the 1980s. A man whose name had appeared nowhere in the investigation. A man who had publicly supported the search for Daniel Mercer. The ultimate hidden connection. Investigators immediately began reviewing old political records. And the pattern appeared. Hartley's administration had approved several construction contracts connected to companies owned by Thomas Voss. The same companies connected to the altered warehouse documents. The same companies Daniel had discovered. The The fraud was larger than anyone imagined. Millions of dollars had moved through fake projects. Materials were purchased but never delivered. Invoices were created for work that never happened. Daniel had not uncovered a small crime. He had discovered a machine, a system built on deception, and the people involved had too much to lose. The confession continued. Pierce wrote that when Hartley arrived at the mine, Daniel immediately recognized him. There was no confusion, no surprise. Daniel knew exactly who he was looking at. That was the moment Pierce understood the truth. Daniel was not just a witness. He was a threat. Because Daniel could connect everything. The companies, the money, the people, the political protection, everything. Pierce wrote that Hartley never raised his voice, never appeared angry. That was what frightened him most. He was calm, controlled, as if the situation was already decided, as if Daniel's fate had already been written. Pierce admitted that he should have arrested everyone. He should have called for backup. He should have protected Daniel. Instead, he made the choice that destroyed his life. He stayed silent. But there was another detail. A detail that changed the entire understanding of the crime. Pierce wrote that Hartley did not order Daniel's death. Not directly. He ordered something else. A warning. A lesson. He wanted Daniel frightened. He wanted Daniel to stop asking questions. But someone else went further. Someone inside the group made a decision nobody expected. Someone turned intimidation into murder. And Pierce knew who it was. The final paragraph contained the answer. The person who killed Daniel Mercer was not the politician, not the businessman, not the corrupt officials. It was the person Daniel trusted enough to reveal the truth to. The person who brought him to the meeting. The person who convinced him everything would be fine. Richard Cole. The confession confirmed the theory investigators had slowly built. Richard was the bridge. The connection between Daniel and the people hiding the fraud. Daniel trusted him. Daniel believed he was helping. Richard betrayed that trust. But the confession revealed something unexpected. Richard did not originally intend to kill Daniel. He panicked. He lost control. The confrontation at the mine escalated. Daniel threatened to expose everything. Richard feared losing everything. His business. His reputation. His future. And in a moment of desperation, he made a decision that changed every life connected to him. After Daniel died, the group reacted. Not with shock. With survival. They protected themselves. They buried evidence. They manipulated the investigation. They created a false story. And they convinced an entire community that the truth was simply impossible to find. But one question remained. Why did Sheriff Benson keep the secret after learning everything? Why did Alan Pierce stay silent? Why did everyone involved carry the burden for decades? The answer was found in one final note attached to the confession. A note written by Pierce years later. I thought time would punish them. Investigators read the sentence repeatedly. Because it revealed the tragedy of the case. Everyone involved believed silence was temporary. They believed they could wait. They believed the truth would disappear. But secrets do not disappear. They wait. The investigation now had a complete picture. But there was still one major problem. Governor William Hartley had died in 2008. Richard Cole had died in 2019. Thomas Voss was suffering from severe memory loss. Marcus Vail was gone. Most of the people responsible would never face a courtroom. The cold case had finally been solved. But justice was complicated. The community reacted with mixed emotions. Some felt relief. Others felt anger. 40 years of unanswered questions had finally received answers. But answers could not return Daniel Mercer. His mother had spent her entire life waiting for a knock on the door. Waiting for someone to say they found him. She never received that moment. She died 3 years before the breakthrough. Never knowing the truth. Never knowing her son's final hours had finally been reconstructed. The investigators visited her grave after the case was officially closed. They placed a copy of the recovered confession beside the flowers. Not because she could read it, but because the truth belonged to her. After 40 years, Daniel Mercer was no longer a missing person. He was a victim whose story had finally been heard. But the case left behind one final mystery. The yellow flowers. The flowers that appeared every year beside the highway. The flowers nobody claimed. Investigators reviewed old surveillance footage one final time. And after enhancing the oldest recordings, they found something hidden in the background. A figure, walking alone, carrying yellow daisies. The person was older, moving slowly, but the face was visible. It was someone who had never been questioned, someone who had never been considered, someone who had carried the memory of that night longer than anyone. And when investigators identified the person, they discovered the final emotional twist of the Utah cold case. The flowers were not from a killer. They were from someone who had been trying to apologize. For 40 years. One bouquet at a time. For 40 years, the highway outside Cedar Valley carried a memory nobody could explain. Every October. Every year. Without exception. Yellow flowers appeared beside the same stretch of road where Daniel Mercer's boots had been discovered. For decades, investigators believed the flowers were connected to the person responsible. A signature. A message. A reminder from someone who had escaped justice. But after the truth finally surfaced, detectives looked at the mystery from a different angle. Maybe the flowers were never a threat. Maybe they were a confession. The surveillance footage changed everything. The person captured walking toward the highway was not a stranger. It was Evelyn Mercer, Daniel's mother. The woman who spent 40 years searching for answers. The woman who never stopped believing her son did not simply disappear. The woman investigators had interviewed dozens of times, but never suspected. Because she had never told anyone. Not even her family. Every anniversary of Daniel's disappearance, Evelyn drove alone to the highway before sunrise. She placed the flowers. She stood there in silence. And she left without saying a word. When detectives finally spoke with her surviving relatives, they discovered the reason. Evelyn had found something in 1982. Something she never reported. A small piece of paper hidden inside Daniel's bedroom. A note he had written before his disappearance. Not a confession. Not a warning. A promise. Daniel wrote that if anything happened to him, he wanted his mother to know one thing. He was not afraid because he had done something wrong. He was afraid because he had found something wrong. Evelyn kept the note hidden because she believed someone was watching. She had already seen what happened to her son. She knew powerful people could make evidence disappear. She knew the truth had been buried by people with influence. So she waited. Year after year. Hoping someone would eventually uncover what she already suspected. The flowers were her way of telling the world. Daniel was still remembered. Daniel still mattered. Daniel was never forgotten. The revelation changed the emotional ending of the case. The cold case that began with abandonment ended with remembrance. But the investigation was not finished. Because solving the mystery of Daniel Mercer raised another question. How many other cases had been affected by the same network? The fraud uncovered during the investigation was massive. Multiple companies. Multiple contracts. Multiple missing records. The discovery triggered reviews across several counties. Old financial cases were reopened. Former officials were questioned. Documents that had been ignored for decades were examined again. And investigators discovered something disturbing. Daniel Mercer was not the only person who noticed something was wrong. Others had raised concerns. Others had asked questions. But unlike Daniel, they had stayed quiet. Some feared losing their jobs. Some feared powerful people. Some simply convinced themselves it was safer not to know. Daniel was different. He kept looking. And that decision cost him his life. The final investigation report described Daniel not as a victim of bad luck, but as someone who uncovered a truth many people wanted hidden. His disappearance exposed corruption. His death exposed betrayal. And his case exposed how easily a mystery can survive when the wrong people control the answers. The remaining evidence was preserved. Daniel's truck. The photographs. The confession. The recovered documents. The fingerprint records. All of it was placed into the official archive. Not as another unsolved file, but as the case that proved no secret stays buried forever. Years later, a new generation of detectives studied the Mercer case. They noticed something important. The breakthrough did not come from one dramatic discovery. It came from small pieces. A fingerprint. A forgotten photograph. A missing document. A sentence written on an old page. A detail ignored because it seemed meaningless. Cold cases are rarely solved because someone suddenly finds a perfect answer. They are solved because someone finally asks the right question. And for Daniel Mercer, that question came 40 years too late. The town of Cedar Valley changed after the case was solved. The old warehouse grounds became something different. Not a place people avoided. Not a place surrounded by rumors. A memorial area. Families visited. Flowers appeared. Stories were shared. People who remembered Daniel as a young man finally spoke openly. They remembered his laugh, his kindness, his habit of helping neighbors. The investigation had spent years studying his final moments. But the community wanted to remember his entire life. Because Daniel Mercer was more than a cold case. More than a headline. More than a photograph inside an evidence file. He was a son. A brother. A friend. A person whose future was stolen before he had the chance to live it. The final chapter of the investigation came when Daniel's remains were returned to his family. A private ceremony was held near the mountains where he had grown up. No cameras. No reporters. Only family. Only friends. Only the people who waited decades for that moment. His brother Michael stood beside the grave holding the old photograph discovered inside the hidden box. The same photograph that connected the men involved. The same photograph that revealed the secret. He placed it beside Daniel's memorial. Not as evidence. As a reminder. Because after 40 years, the picture no longer represented a crime. It represented the truth. The Utah cold case that once seemed impossible had finally reached its conclusion. But the questions left behind remained powerful. How many answers are still hidden inside forgotten files? How many clues are waiting beneath layers of time? How many families are still waiting for the moment when someone finally looks again? Daniel Mercer's story became a reminder that time does not erase the truth. It only hides it. Sometimes beneath the ground. Sometimes inside old records. Sometimes inside the memories of people who are too afraid to speak. But eventually, something always survives. A fingerprint. A photograph. A forgotten note. A single piece of evidence waiting for someone patient enough to find it. 40 years after Daniel disappeared, the world finally learned what happened. The missing man was found. The lies were exposed. The silence was broken. But every October morning, when the wind moves across that empty Utah highway and a small group of yellow flowers appears beside the road, the town remembers the same thing. A mystery can last for decades. A secret can survive generations. But the truth has a way of returning. And sometimes, the smallest forgotten clue is enough to bring an entire buried story back into the light. The years after the investigation changed Cedar Valley forever. For decades, the town had lived beneath the weight of an unanswered question. People drove past the old highway and remembered the boots. They passed the abandoned industrial area and remembered the rumors. They looked toward the mountains and wondered what had happened on that October night. But now the silence was gone. The mystery that had followed generations finally had a name. Daniel Mercer had not vanished into nowhere. He had been hidden by people who believed time would protect them. They were wrong. Because time did something unexpected. Time preserved the evidence they tried to destroy. Time kept the memories they tried to erase. Time allowed one small fingerprint, one forgotten photograph, and one damaged recording to survive long enough for the truth to return. The official closing of the case did not bring celebration. It brought something quieter. A strange mixture of relief and sadness. For investigators, solving the case was the moment they had spent years chasing. But for Daniel's family, it was something different. It was confirmation of a loss they had already carried for decades. The answers finally arrived. But they arrived too late. Daniel's father had spent the final years of his life sitting in the same chair near the front window, watching every vehicle that passed their house. Every unfamiliar truck. Every stranger walking down the street. A part of him believed that one day Daniel might appear. Not because the evidence suggested it. Because a parent's hope does not follow evidence. It follows love. After the truth was revealed, Daniel's old friends returned to Cedar Valley. Some had moved away. Some had built new lives. But the case brought them back. They gathered around old photographs. They shared stories investigators had never heard. Stories that had nothing to do with crime. Daniel fixing a neighbor's broken fence. Daniel staying late to help coworkers finish a difficult job. Daniel laughing so loudly that people in the next room knew he had arrived. Those memories mattered. Because for 40 years, Daniel had existed publicly as a mystery. A missing person. A photograph. A cold case number. Now people finally remembered him as a person. The investigation also changed the way local authorities handled forgotten cases. Old evidence storage procedures were reviewed. Archived files were digitized. Unsolved investigations were reopened. Detectives began searching through cases that had been considered impossible. Because the Mercer case proved something important. Impossible did not mean unsolvable. It only meant nobody had found the right door yet. Several retired officers who had worked the original case admitted their mistakes. Some said they trusted the wrong people. Some said they were blinded by reputations. Some said they never imagined someone inside the system could interfere. The hardest truth was not that criminals lied. Everyone expected criminals to lie. The hardest truth was that ordinary people allowed the lie to survive. Fear. Ambition. Loyalty. Silence. Those things protected the secret longer than any locked door ever could. Years later, investigators reviewing the case still focused on one question. How did so many people keep the same secret for so long? The answer was complicated. Because there was never one person holding the entire truth. Each person held only a piece. Richard Cole knew one part. Thomas Voss knew another. Marcus Vail knew another. Alan Pierce knew another. Sheriff Benson carried another. Each person convinced themselves their silence was only temporary. Only necessary. Only until the danger passed. But temporary decisions became permanent consequences. One night became 40 years. One lie became a legacy. And one missing man became the center of a mystery that defined an entire town. The final evidence review revealed one last unexpected detail. The metal box containing Daniel's belongings had not been hidden randomly. The location was chosen carefully. Someone wanted it found someday. Someone wanted the truth to survive. Investigators never proved who placed it there. Some believed it was Alan Pierce. Others believed it was Sheriff Benson. Some believed it was someone connected to Daniel who regretted remaining silent. The answer was never confirmed. And perhaps that was fitting. Because the Mercer case was always about the things people tried to hide. And the things they could not completely erase. The final report included a sentence that became remembered throughout Utah. Truth delayed is not truth destroyed. Those words appeared on the memorial plaque created near the highway. Below them was Daniel's name. No mention of suspects. No mention of corruption. No mention of the decades of investigation. Only his name. Because in the end, the story was never supposed to belong to the people who hurt him. It belonged to the person they tried to erase. Every October, the yellow flowers continued to appear. Even after the case was solved. Even after the truth was known. People wondered why. Some believed it was tradition. Some believed it was grief. Some believed it was a reminder. But those who knew Daniel's story understood. The flowers represented something simple. A promise. A promise that someone remembered. A promise that someone cared. A promise that even after 40 years of darkness, Daniel Mercer was never completely lost. The highway remained quiet. The mountains remained unchanged. The desert wind continued moving across the land, just as it had in 1982. But the silence was different now. It was no longer the silence of a mystery. It was the silence after an answer. The silence after a family finally received the truth. The silence after a town finally understood what happened on that cold October night. And somewhere beneath the Utah sky, where the desert meets the mountains, one forgotten cold case finally reached its final chapter. Not because time solved it. Not because secrets disappeared. But because someone finally looked closely enough at the clues everyone else had overlooked. A fingerprint. A photograph. A missing page. A voice trapped inside an old recording. Small pieces. Almost invisible. But together, they brought back a story that had waited 40 years to be told. And that is why the Mercer case remains unforgettable. Because it proved the most frightening mysteries are not always the ones with no answers. Sometimes the most frightening mysteries are the ones where the answers were there all along, waiting for someone brave enough to find them. For the people of Cedar Valley, the Mercer case never truly became history. Some cases disappear after they are solved. Names fade. Headlines become old newspapers. People move on. But Daniel Mercer's story remained different, because the mystery had lasted longer than some of the people who searched for him. A generation was born while his name stayed attached to a question mark. Children grew up hearing whispers about the man who vanished. Parents told their families not to forget, not because they wanted to keep the pain alive, because they feared forgetting was exactly what the people responsible had wanted. For decades, Daniel existed in two worlds. To investigators, he was evidence, a case file, a timeline, a collection of unanswered questions. To his family, he was something else entirely. He was the man who fixed broken radios for neighbors. The man who always arrived early when someone needed help. The man who believed doing the right thing mattered, even when nobody was watching. That was the cruelest part of the story. Daniel did not disappear because he was looking for trouble. He disappeared because he refused to ignore something he believed was wrong. And that decision became the reason his name survived. After the case was officially closed, investigators continued reviewing the evidence. Not because they doubted the conclusion, because cold cases leave behind shadows. There were still unanswered details. Who exactly moved the evidence? Who placed the hidden box? Who left the anonymous clues? Who sent the yellow flowers during the years when nobody knew the truth? Some questions would never receive answers. And perhaps that was the final lesson of the Mercer investigation. Solving a case does not always mean every mystery disappears. Sometimes solving a case means understanding which questions can finally rest, and which questions will remain forever. The abandoned mine where Daniel was discovered became a place of reflection. Not a tourist attraction. Not a crime scene. A quiet place where people came to remember. Families of other missing persons visited after hearing Daniel's story. They left flowers, notes, photographs, small messages written to people who never came home. Because Daniel's case became something larger than itself. It became proof that forgotten does not mean lost. Across the country, detectives studying old investigations looked at the Mercer case as an example. They examined how evidence can survive, how memories can change, how one overlooked detail can destroy decades of assumptions. The fingerprint that cracked the case had been meaningless in 1982. A small mark. A trace left behind without thought. But decades later, that tiny piece of evidence carried more weight than hundreds of interviews. It connected the past to the present. It forced people to answer questions they had avoided. It reminded investigators that every scene tells a story, even when the people involved refused to. The former warehouse where Daniel's disappearance began was eventually demolished. The old walls came down. The broken windows disappeared. The place that held so many secrets became an empty field. But before the final structure was removed, investigators photographed everything. Not because they expected to find more, because they understood something important. Places remember. The ground, the walls, the roads. They hold pieces of what happened. And sometimes those pieces wait decades before someone listens. Years after the case closed, a young detective assigned to review historical investigations visited Daniel's memorial. She had never met him. She had never been part of the investigation. To her, Daniel was just a file she had studied. But standing beside the flowers, she realized something. Every cold case has a person behind it. Someone who had dreams. Someone who had plans. Someone who expected tomorrow to arrive. The detective later wrote, "The hardest part of solving old cases is remembering that the victim never had the chance to grow old." That sentence stayed with the department. Because Daniel's story was not about the people who lied. It was about the life that was interrupted. The investigation uncovered corruption. It exposed betrayal. It revealed a network of fear and silence. But the final memory of Daniel was not anger. It was humanity. The town eventually placed a permanent marker near the highway. The same highway where the first clue appeared. The same place where the world first realized Daniel Mercer was gone. The inscription was simple. No dramatic words. No accusations. Just a reminder. For Daniel Mercer. Loved. Remembered. Never forgotten. On the day the memorial was unveiled, people who had not spoken in decades gathered together. Former investigators. Neighbors. Friends. Family members. Even some people connected to the original investigation. They stood silently as the wind moved through the valley. For the first time, nobody was searching. Nobody was hiding. Nobody was waiting for answers. There was only acceptance. 40 years earlier, Daniel left home believing he would return. He never did. But the truth eventually returned for him. It crossed through decades, through lies, through lost records, through people who hoped silence would last forever. It survived. Because the truth does something secrets cannot. It waits. The Mercer case became one of Utah's most talked about cold cases, not because of the criminals involved, not because of the political connections, not because of the shocking discoveries. It became unforgettable because one man's disappearance showed the world how powerful a forgotten clue can become. A fingerprint, a hidden note, a damaged recording, a photograph buried in dust, evidence that looked worthless, evidence that almost disappeared, evidence that finally spoke. And every year, when autumn returns to Cedar Valley, the yellow flowers appear again. Some people still wonder who places them. Some mysteries remain. But perhaps that is the final image Daniel's story leaves behind. Not a dark road. Not an abandoned mine. Not a forgotten file. A small group of yellow flowers moving in the wind. A quiet reminder that even after decades of silence, someone was still there. Someone remembered. Someone cared. And someone refused to let the truth disappear.